Barron Trump faces unfair treatment at a store. Donald Trump's intervention changes the rules forever. Fiction story. It was a breezy Saturday afternoon when Barron Trump decided to stop by a local boutique in Manhattan. The store was known for its high-end merchandise, sleek interiors, and staff that prided themselves on catering to a discerning clientele. Despite its reputation, Barron preferred to shop there when he needed something casual. He appreciated the anonymity it offered. Most of the time, no one recognized him, and he could go about his business without the weight of his family name looming over him. That day, Barron entered the store wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, his tall frame instantly drawing attention from the staff. The boutique was relatively quiet, with a few shoppers browsing racks of designer clothes. A sales associate, a middle-aged man with perfectly coiffed hair and a tailored suit, stood near the entrance. His name tag read Victor, and his expression shifted subtly when he noticed Barron. "Can I help you?" Victor asked, his tone polite but clipped. "I'm just looking around." "Thanks," Barron replied, giving a small nod before heading toward a rack of jackets near the back. Victor watched him with narrowed eyes, his demeanor turning cold. To him, Barron didn't look like the type of person who belonged in the store. The casual clothing, the lack of flashy accessories, it didn't align with the wealthy, upscale clientele Victor was used to catering to. As Barron moved through the store, Victor followed at a distance, his presence intrusive and unwelcoming. Barron ignored the scrutiny, focusing instead on the clothes. He picked out a sleek black jacket and ran his fingers over the fabric, appreciating its quality. He glanced at the price tag but didn't flinch. He had grown up in a world where such numbers were commonplace. "Are you sure you can afford that?" Victor's voice cut through the air, sharp and condescending. He had approached Barron, his arms crossed and a smug smile on his face. Barron looked up, surprised by the tone. "Excuse me?" I said, Victor repeated, his smile widening. "Are you sure you're in the right store? These jackets aren't cheap, you know." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. A few other shoppers glanced over, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. Barron's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He had dealt with people like Victor before, those who judged others based on appearances and assumed superiority. "I'm aware of the price," Barron said evenly, holding Victor's gaze. "Thank you," Victor chuckled, the sound dripping with condescension. "Just trying to save you the embarrassment. People like you usually stick to the outlets." Barron's blue eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't rise to the bait. "I don't think that's your call to make." The exchange caught the attention of a younger sales associate named Mia, who had been restocking shelves nearby. She frowned, clearly uncomfortable with Victor's behavior. Unlike her coworker, Mia believed in treating every customer with respect, regardless of how they looked. "Victor," Mia said softly, stepping closer, "I think we should let him shop in peace." Victor shot her a withering glance. "Stay out of it, Mia. I've got this under control." But Mia didn't back down. She turned to Barron with a small, apologetic smile. "If you need help finding anything, let me know," she said, her tone kind. Barron nodded in appreciation but didn't respond. He was too focused on Victor, whose smug demeanor was becoming increasingly grating. Victor's behavior escalated when Barron approached the register to purchase the jacket. As Barron placed the item on the counter, Victor smirked and rang it up, the price flashing on the screen. "That'll be $1,495, he said loudly, as if daring Barron to balk at the number. Without a word, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, handing it over. Victor's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, swiping the card and returning it with a flourish. "Well, I suppose miracles do happen," he muttered under his breath. Barron ignored the comment and signed the receipt, his expression calm but unreadable. As he turned to leave, Victor called out, his tone dripping with false cheer. "Have a nice day, sir. Don't let the door hit you on the way out." The jab was met with muffled laughter from a few customers who had been watching. Mia shot Victor a glare but said nothing, clearly torn between speaking up and risking her job. Barron paused at the door, turning back to face Victor. His voice was quiet but firm as he said, "You should be more careful who you talk down to." You never know who you're dealing with. With that, he walked out, leaving Victor momentarily speechless. The other customers exchanged glances, their amusement turning to unease. Outside the store, Baron took a deep breath, pushing down the frustration that had been simmering throughout the encounter. He wasn't angry because Victor had been rude. He was angry because he knew this kind of treatment wasn't unique to him. How many others had walked into that store and faced the same judgment, the same dismissive attitude, simply because they didn't fit Victor's narrow view of who belonged? Baron pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Baron, what's up?" His father, Donald Trump, said, his tone warm. "I need your help," Baron replied, his voice steady but firm. Donald paused. "What's going on?" Baron explained the situation succinctly, recounting every detail of his interaction with Victor. His father listened in silence, and when Baron finished, Donald's tone shifted, calm but resolute. "Don't worry about it," Donald said. "I'll take care of this." Baron wasn't entirely sure what his father meant by that, but he trusted him. If there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that Donald Trump didn't take kindly to unfair treatment, especially when it involved his family. As Baron walked away from the store, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever his father had planned, he knew it would be big. And for Victor, it would be a day he would never forget. The next day, Victor arrived at the boutique feeling smug. The previous afternoon's encounter with Baron Trump had left him feeling triumphant, his need to assert superiority over certain customers satisfied. He didn't think much of the young man in the hoodie, just another rich kid who thought money equated to respect. Victor was convinced he'd put Baron in his place. The store was bustling with activity, as Saturdays often were. High-profile clients browsed the racks, their designer shoes clicking against the polished floors. Victor thrived in this environment. He catered to the wealthy with exaggerated enthusiasm, always making sure they felt important, provided they fit his mold of what a worthy customer looked like. But as the morning stretched into the afternoon, Victor noticed something unusual. A string of customers came in, looked around briefly, and left without making a purchase. Some whispered to each other, pointing at the store's logo on the glass doors before walking away. The boutique's usual lively atmosphere began to feel tense, as if something was brewing just out of sight. "Victor, do you notice anything strange?" Mia asked quietly, approaching him as he adjusted a display. Her expression was wary, her eyes darting toward the entrance where yet another pair of customers had just left. Victor shrugged, feigning disinterest. "It's probably nothing. Maybe the riffraff finally figured out they can't afford anything here." Mia frowned but didn't respond. She had worked with Victor long enough to know his dismissive attitude wasn't worth challenging in moments like these. Instead, she returned to her duties, her unease lingering. As the afternoon wore on, the odd occurrences continued. A few customers who were known regulars entered, only to leave after speaking in hushed tones with each other. Victor, who had initially brushed off the unusual behavior, began to feel a flicker of uncertainty. But his pride wouldn't allow him to dwell on it for long. Around mid-afternoon, the boutique's owner, a sharp-dressed man in his late 40s named Richard, arrived unexpectedly. He rarely visited the store in person, preferring to oversee operations remotely. His presence immediately drew attention, with staff straightening up and rushing to greet him. "Good afternoon, everyone," Richard said, his tone brisk but cordial. He looked around the boutique, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Victor, a word in private." Victor stiffened but quickly recovered, flashing his usual confident smile. "Of course, sir. Right this way." The two men stepped into Richard's office, the door closing behind them. Richard gestured for Victor to sit but remained standing, his arms crossed. "Do you know why I'm here, Victor?" Richard asked, his tone calm but pointed. Victor frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "No, sir. I assume it's just a routine visit." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not exactly. I received a very interesting phone call last night. A call from someone who had a less than stellar experience in this store yesterday. A very high-profile someone, Victor's stomach twisted, but he kept his expression neutral. I see. May I ask who it was? Richard's gaze hardened. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Baron Trump. The name hung in the air, heavy with implication. Victor swallowed hard, his mind racing as he tried to formulate a response. Sir, with all due respect, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Victor began, his tone measured. Mr. Trump was, let's just say, a less than ideal customer. He didn't exactly fit the image we try to maintain here. Richard's eyes narrowed. And who gave you the authority to decide which customers fit the image? Your job, Victor, is to provide exceptional service to every person who walks through that door, not to pass judgment based on your personal biases. Victor felt his cheeks flush with indignation, but he forced himself to remain calm. Of course, sir. I apologize if my actions were misinterpreted. I was simply trying to ensure the boutique's reputation remains intact. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. Victor, do you have any idea what kind of position you've put us in? Do you know who Baron's father is? This isn't just about losing one customer. It's about the potential consequences of your behavior. If word gets out that we mistreat customers, especially one with connections like his, it could ruin us. Victor's heart sank, but his pride wouldn't let him back down entirely. With all due respect, sir, I don't think it's fair to cater to someone just because of their name. We have standards, and those standards include treating everyone with respect. Richard cut him off, his tone sharp. This isn't negotiable, Victor. Consider this your final warning. Another incident like this, and you're out. Victor nodded stiffly, his jaw tight. Understood. Richard studied him for a moment before nodding. Good. Now get back to work. As Victor left the office, his mind churned with frustration. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to discern who deserved his attention and who didn't. But now, his judgment had backfired spectacularly. The idea that someone like Baron, a quiet kid in a hoodie, could wield so much power infuriated him. When Victor returned to the sales floor, he noticed Mia watching him, her expression wary. Is everything okay? She asked cautiously. Victor waved her off, forcing a smile. Everything's fine. Let's focus on our work, shall we? But as the afternoon wore on, Victor's confidence began to erode. The whispers among the customers grew louder, and the store's usually steady stream of sales slowed to a trickle. It was as if the boutique had become a magnet for curiosity rather than commerce. Finally, Victor's worst fears were realized when two men in suits entered the store. They were clearly not there to shop. Their sharp gazes and purposeful strides made that clear. One of them approached the counter where Victor was standing. Victor, I presume? The man asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Victor nodded, his palms suddenly clammy. Yes. How can I help you? The man handed Victor a card, his expression unreadable. We're here on behalf of the Trump Organization. Mr. Trump has taken a personal interest in your behavior toward his son yesterday. We'd like to have a conversation. Victor's stomach dropped, the gravity of the situation finally hitting him. He glanced around the store, his colleagues watching with wide eyes. Mia's expression was a mix of shock and concern. Of course, Victor stammered. Let me call my manager. The man raised an eyebrow. We're not here to speak to your manager. We're here to speak to you. The tension in the room was suffocating as Victor realized he was out of his depth. For the first time, the weight of his arrogance began to settle on his shoulders, and he knew he was in trouble. Victor sat at the counter, trying to compose himself as the two men from the Trump Organization stood nearby. Their presence was suffocating, their calm demeanor masking an authority that Victor couldn't shake. He felt the eyes of his co-workers on him, each glance a mix of curiosity and judgment. His usual confidence faltered under the weight of the scrutiny, but his pride kept him from showing it. What exactly is this about? Victor asked finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. One of the men, a tall figure with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense tone, stepped closer. It's about your treatment of Baron Trump yesterday. Mr. Trump has concerns about how you conduct yourself as a representative of this establishment. Victor forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. Concerns? I think this is being blown way out of proportion. I treated him like any other customer. The second man, shorter but equally imposing, raised an eyebrow. That's precisely the problem. You didn't treat him like every other customer. You targeted him, judged him, and attempted to humiliate him. That's not just unprofessional. It's unacceptable. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but the taller man cut him off. You should understand that this is more than a simple complaint. Mr. Trump takes the treatment of his family very seriously. He's given us clear instructions to ensure that incidents like this don't happen again. Victor's face flushed with anger, but he masked it with feigned indignation. I understand the importance of customer service, but I think this is being exaggerated. He didn't seem upset at the time. Baron doesn't react the way most people would. The shorter man replied coolly. That doesn't mean your behavior went unnoticed. Quite the opposite. It's why we're here. As Victor struggled to come up with a response, the boutique's owner, Richard, entered the scene. His usually calm expression was tinged with unease, a sign that even he recognized the gravity of the situation. Gentlemen, Richard said, addressing the two representatives with a polite nod, I'd like to assure you that we take this matter very seriously. I've already spoken to Victor about his conduct. That's a good start, the taller man said, his gaze shifting to Victor. But we're here to ensure this conversation doesn't end with words. Mr. Trump expects accountability, not empty promises. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Of course, we'll handle this internally and ensure it doesn't happen again. The shorter man handed Richard a business card. We'll be following up. In the meantime, you might want to reconsider how you train your staff. Richard took the card, his knuckles whitening as he clenched it. Understood. The two men gave Victor one last look before turning to leave, their presence lingering like a storm cloud even after they walked out the door. The tension in the store was palpable, the silence oppressive as everyone waited to see what would happen next. As the afternoon wore on, Victor's frustration festered. He couldn't shake the humiliation of being reprimanded in front of his coworkers. He saw the whispers, the sideways glances, the unspoken judgment that filled the air. It made his blood boil. By the time the store began to empty out for the day, Victor's anger had reached a boiling point. He cornered Mia near the back of the store, his expression dark. "Did you say something to them?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Mia blinked, caught off guard. "What? No, of course not. Then why were they looking at me like I'm some kind of criminal?" Victor snapped. "You've been acting weird since yesterday. Did you put them up to this?" Mia frowned, her discomfort giving way to defiance. "Victor, no one had to put them up to this. You brought this on yourself. You were rude to Baron, and now you're dealing with the consequences." Victor's eyes narrowed. Consequences? For what? Telling the truth? He didn't belong here, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. Do you even hear yourself? Mia shot back, her voice rising. You judged him based on nothing but your own arrogance. And now you're blaming everyone else for your mistakes. Victor took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You'd better watch your tone, Mia. You don't want to get involved in something that's above your pay grade. Mia didn't flinch. Neither do you. Her words hung in the air, cutting through Victor's bluster. He stepped back, his jaw tightening as he turned and walked away, his frustration mounting. As the store closed for the night, Victor received an email from Richard. The message was brief but firm. He was required to attend a meeting the following morning to discuss next steps regarding his behavior. Victor read the email twice, his stomach sinking. He knew what next steps usually meant, and the thought of losing his position, his carefully crafted image of authority, made his hands tremble with anger. He spent the rest of the night stewing, replaying the events of the past 2 days in his mind. His humiliation at the hands of Baron, the condescending tone of the Trump representatives, the way his colleagues looked at him, all of it fueled his resentment. In his mind, he wasn't at fault. He was the victim of an overreaction, of people too sensitive to handle the truth. But beneath the layers of arrogance and denial, a seed of doubt began to take root. He couldn't ignore the fact that his actions had backfired spectacularly, that his attempts to assert control had only left him more vulnerable. The realization gnawed at him, threatening to crack the facade he had built around himself. As Victor lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of Baron's calm, unwavering gaze. It haunted him, a reminder of everything he had tried and failed to break. For the first time, Victor felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him, and it terrified him. The next morning, Victor arrived at the store early, his nerves frayed. The meeting with Richard loomed over him like a storm cloud, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of his reckoning. As he walked through the store, he noticed a sleek black car pull up outside. The driver stepped out and opened the door, revealing a tall figure who moved with quiet authority. It was Baron Trump. Victor froze, his heart pounding as Baron entered the store. The young man's expression was calm, but his presence carried a weight that Victor couldn't ignore. This wasn't just another customer. This was someone who had come to settle unfinished business. The other staff members exchanged glances, their curiosity and apprehension palpable. As Baron approached the counter, Victor felt his composure slipping. He wasn't ready for what was coming, but he knew there was no escaping it. Baron Trump's arrival at the boutique sent an electric charge through the room. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, customers whispered among themselves, and Victor stood rooted behind the counter, his usual smug demeanor replaced by a tense unease. The quiet confidence in Baron's stride made it clear he wasn't here to browse. Victor forced a tight smile as Baron approached. "Good morning. Back so soon?" he asked, his tone teetering between forced politeness and thinly veiled contempt. Baron didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed the shopping bag from his previous visit on the counter. He opened it and carefully removed the black jacket he had purchased, laying it flat. His blue eyes locked onto Victor's, unblinking and unshaken. "This," Baron began, gesturing toward the jacket, "isn't about the product. It's about how I was treated when I bought it." Victor crossed his arms, his confidence returning in a defensive stance. "I see. And what seems to be the issue? The jacket isn't up to your standards." "The jacket is fine," Baron said evenly. "The issue is you." Victor's expression darkened, his shoulders tensing. "Excuse me? You judged me the moment I walked through that door," Baron continued, his voice calm but firm. "You treated me like I didn't belong here, like I wasn't worth your time. And I'm not here to demand an apology. I'm here to make sure you understand something. You don't get to decide someone's worth based on what they're wearing or how they look." The boutique fell silent, the weight of Baron's words pressing down on everyone in the room. Victor's face flushed with anger, his jaw tightening as he struggled to maintain his composure. "With all due respect," Victor said, his voice low and sharp, "this is a high-end establishment. We cater to a certain clientele. If I made assumptions, it was because I've been trained to uphold certain standards. Standards that include humiliating customers?" Baron shot back, his tone unwavering. "You think you were doing your job by talking down to me? By trying to make me feel small?" Victor bristled, his pride refusing to let him back down. "I don't have time for lectures," he snapped. "If you have an issue, take it up with management." "I already have," Baron replied, his voice steady. "And I'm not done." Victor's eyes narrowed, his temper flaring. "You think you can just walk in here and throw your weight around because of your name? Because of who your father is? Let me tell you something. Your name doesn't mean anything here." Baron's expression didn't waver. He stepped closer, his towering frame emphasizing the stark difference in their composure. "You're right. My name shouldn't matter. And that's exactly why I'm here, to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the boutique's owner, Richard, entered the room. His sharp gaze swept over the scene, taking in the tense standoff between Baron and Victor. "What's going on here?" Richard demanded, his tone firm. Victor straightened, his face flushing as he scrambled to regain control. Mr. Trump was just expressing his concerns about our service. Concerns? Richard repeated, his voice cold. Is that what you call it? Barron turned to Richard, his calm demeanor intact. This isn't just about me. It's about how your staff treats customers who don't fit their expectations. I want to know what you're going to do to fix it. Richard's jaw tightened as he glanced at Victor, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Mr. Trump, I assure you, this is not how we operate. Victor's behavior was unacceptable, and I've already addressed it. If there's more we can do to make this right. This isn't about me getting special treatment, Barron interrupted. It's about setting a standard for how people are treated, no matter who they are. Because right now, your store is sending the wrong message. Richard hesitated, clearly torn between addressing Barron's concerns and protecting his staff. You're absolutely right, he said finally. We'll implement new training to ensure this doesn't happen again. Victor's face turned red, his frustration bubbling over. Training, he burst out. For what? Telling the truth? I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing my job. Richard turned to Victor, his expression icy. Your job is to treat every customer with respect, not to make assumptions, not to pass judgment, and certainly not to undermine the reputation of this establishment. Victor's fists clenched at his sides, his pride refusing to let him admit defeat. So that's it? I'm the bad guy because I dared to have standards? You're the bad guy because you treated someone poorly for no reason, Richard snapped. And if you can't see that, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. The room was silent, the tension thick as Victor glared at Richard, his chest heaving with indignation. For a moment, it seemed as though he might argue further, but the weight of the situation finally settled on him. You'll regret this, Victor muttered under his breath, his voice laced with defiance. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the back of the store, his exit punctuated by the slamming of a door. Richard let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He turned back to Barron, his expression softening. Mr. Trump, I sincerely apologize for what happened here. I hope we can rebuild your trust. Barron nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. This isn't about trust. It's about doing the right thing. And that starts with making sure this doesn't happen again. Richard nodded, his face solemn. Understood. We'll make it right. As Barron left the store, the weight of the confrontation lingered in the air. Victor's arrogance had been dealt a blow, but the fight was far from over. Barron knew that this was only the beginning of a larger battle, one that would test his resolve and force Victor to face the full consequences of his actions. The next morning, Victor arrived at the boutique with a storm brewing in his mind. The events of the previous day had left him fuming. He couldn't stop replaying the confrontation with Barron, the way the young man had stood his ground, unflinching, while Richard and the Trump representatives scrutinized every aspect of his behavior. It felt as though the entire world was conspiring against him, and Victor's wounded pride refused to let it go. But something was different today. As Victor walked through the boutique, he noticed a palpable tension in the air. The staff whispered in hushed tones, their glances darting toward him before quickly looking away. The usual hum of activity felt muted, as if the store itself were holding its breath. "Morning, Victor," Mia said cautiously as he approached the counter. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her tone that made Victor pause. "What's going on?" Victor asked, his voice sharp. Mia hesitated before answering. "You might want to check the news." Victor frowned, pulling out his phone. As he scrolled through the headlines, his stomach sank. There, plastered across multiple outlets, was a story that left him cold. Luxury boutique employee humiliates Barron Trump. Family responds. The article detailed the events of Barron's visit, describing Victor's dismissive behavior and condescending remarks in vivid detail. But it wasn't just the story that rattled Victor, it was the implications. The piece wasn't written as a hit job or a smear. It was a carefully crafted narrative that highlighted a broader issue of judgment and discrimination in high-end retail spaces. The final paragraph hit Victor like a punch to the gut. Sources within the Trump Organization have confirmed that Barron Trump, who manages multiple philanthropic and business projects for his family, was personally involved in funding the boutique's recent renovations, including its state-of-the-art displays and luxury features. The irony of his treatment has not gone unnoticed. Victor's hands shook as he lowered his phone, his mind reeling. Baron wasn't just another customer. He was a key figure in the boutique's success. The jacket he had purchased yesterday, likely hanging on racks Baron himself had helped finance. Victor's dismissal of Baron as not belonging now looked like a cruel joke. As the weight of the revelation settled over him, Victor's indignation flared. "This is a setup," he muttered, his voice laced with desperation. He didn't say anything about being involved with the renovations. He just let you what? Mia asked, her voice quiet but cutting. Let you talk down to him? Let you embarrass yourself? Victor's eyes narrowed. You don't understand. This isn't fair. He baited me. Mia crossed her arms, her gaze steady. No, Victor. He gave you every chance to do your job, and you chose to let your arrogance get in the way. Now you're dealing with the consequences. Before Victor could respond, the boutique's glass doors opened, and Baron Trump walked in. He wasn't alone this time. 2 men in suits flanked him, their presence as imposing as it was understated. The room fell silent as the trio approached the counter, the staff holding their breath as they watched. Victor straightened, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. Back again, Mr. Trump, he said, forcing a smile. What can we do for you today? Baron didn't respond immediately. He placed his hands on the counter, leaning forward slightly as he met Victor's gaze. I wanted to see how things were going, he said, his voice calm but firm. After all, this boutique is a reflection of the investments we've made in this community. It's important to me that everything runs smoothly. Victor's jaw tightened. I see. Well, I assure you, we're doing everything we can to maintain the highest standards. Baron tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes unblinking. Are you? Because what I saw yesterday didn't reflect the standards this boutique claims to uphold. Victor's forced smile wavered. I've already discussed the matter with Richard. He assured me it's being handled. And yet, Baron continued, his tone even, I don't see much evidence of change. Your attitude hasn't shifted. Your excuses haven't stopped. And as someone who's invested in this business, I find that unacceptable. The staff exchanged nervous glances, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard emerged from his office, his expression tight as he approached the scene. Baron, Richard began, his tone carefully measured. I apologize for any lingering issues. I've already spoken with Victor. It's not enough, Baron interrupted, his gaze never leaving Victor's. This isn't just about me. It's about the message the store sends to everyone who walks through those doors. If Victor's behavior is allowed to continue, it undermines everything this boutique stands for. Victor bristled, his fists clenching at his sides. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. I've been here for years. I know how to do my job. Then why aren't you doing it? Baron shot back, his voice sharp. Your job is to treat every customer with respect, not to decide who deserves to shop here, not to humiliate people for your own ego. If you can't see that, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Richard cleared his throat, his gaze darting between Baron and Victor. Baron, I assure you we're taking this seriously. Good, Baron said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Because if this doesn't change, I'll have no choice but to reconsider our involvement with this boutique. The weight of Baron's words landed like a hammer, the implication unmistakable. Without the Trump organization's backing, the boutique's future would be in jeopardy. Richard's face paled as he realized the stakes, and even Victor seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. You can't do that, Victor blurted, his voice tinged with panic. This isn't about business. It's personal. Baron straightened, his expression calm but resolute. It became personal when you made it about me. Now it's about making sure no one else has to deal with what I dealt with. With that, Baron turned and walked away, the 2 men in suits following close behind. The boutique remained silent long after he was gone, the weight of his words lingering in the air. Victor stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. But deep down, he knew. The balance of power had shifted, and there was no coming back from it. The boutique had emptied out, the usual flow of customers reduced to a trickle. Richard had retreated to his office, no doubt deliberating how to handle the situation. The staff, meanwhile, avoided Victor, their glances filled with a mix of judgment and pity. It was as if the store itself had turned against him. But Victor wasn't ready to back down. His pride wouldn't let him. In his mind, this wasn't about right or wrong anymore, it was about reclaiming control. He couldn't stand the thought of Baron Trump, a teenager, dictating his fate. His humiliation had festered into resentment, and that resentment fueled his next move. Later that evening, as the boutique prepared to close, Baron returned. This time, he came alone, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure as he entered the store. The air seemed to shift as he walked in, his presence drawing the attention of every staff member. Victor stood behind the counter, his expression a mask of forced calm. "Back again, Mr. Trump?" he said, his tone laced with false cheer. "What a surprise." Baron didn't respond immediately. He approached the counter with measured steps, his gaze steady. "I wanted to see how things were progressing," he said finally. "It's important to me that this boutique reflects the values it claims to uphold." Victor smirked, his bravado returning in a last-ditch effort to assert dominance. "And what values would those be? Catering to people who throw their weight around because of their name?" The staff froze, their eyes darting between Baron and Victor. The tension was palpable, the silence heavy with anticipation. But Baron didn't flinch. "This has nothing to do with my name," Baron said evenly. "It has everything to do with accountability. Something you seem to have a hard time understanding." Victor bristled, his fists clenching at his sides. "You talk a big game, but let's be honest. If your name wasn't Trump, you wouldn't even be standing here. You're just a spoiled kid playing at being important." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. But Baron remained calm, his expression unreadable. "If that's what you think," he said quietly, "then you haven't been paying attention." Before Victor could respond, the boutique's glass doors opened, and Richard entered, flanked by two other individuals, a man and a woman in business attire. Their presence immediately commanded attention, their purposeful strides and serious expressions leaving no doubt that they were here to settle the matter once and for all. "Victor," Richard said, his tone sharp, "we need to talk." Victor straightened, his bravado faltering. "Of course. What's this about?" The woman stepped forward, her gaze icy. "It's about the damage you've done. Not just to this boutique's reputation, but to its core values. Your behavior has been unacceptable, and it's left us no choice." Victor's face turned red, his anger bubbling over. "No choice? Are you seriously listening to him?" He gestured toward Baron, his voice rising. "He's the one pulling strings, using his influence to make me look bad. This isn't about accountability. It's about power." Baron stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Power doesn't come from tearing people down. It comes from building something meaningful, something that lasts. And right now, you're the one destroying everything this boutique stands for." Richard nodded, his expression grim. "He's right, Victor. This isn't just about one customer. It's about a pattern of behavior that can't be ignored. We've received complaints from other customers about your attitude. And this incident has brought everything to a head." Victor stared at Richard, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. "You're firing me?" he asked finally, his voice shaking with disbelief. The man beside Richard nodded. "Effective immediately. You've left us no choice." Victor's face twisted with anger, his fists clenched. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "I've been loyal to this place for years. I've kept it running while you sat in your office, and this is how you repay me." "You kept it running," Richard said coldly, "by alienating customers, tarnishing our reputation, and creating an environment of judgment and hostility. That's not loyalty. That's sabotage." Victor glared at Baron, his anger boiling over. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You think you've won, don't you? But this isn't over. People like you, people who hide behind their names, you'll get what's coming to you. Baron didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his blue eyes unblinking as he met Victor's glare. This was never about winning. It was about standing up for what's right. You can blame me all you want, but at the end of the day, you did this to yourself. Victor's shoulders slumped, his defiance finally giving way to the weight of his actions. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the boutique, the door slamming shut behind him. The staff let out a collective breath, the tension in the room dissipating like a storm passing. Richard turned to Baron, his expression one of gratitude and respect. "Mr. Trump," he said, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. I promise we'll use this as an opportunity to grow and improve." Baron nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "That's all I wanted. A place like this should be welcoming to everyone, not just those who meet someone's narrow expectations." As Baron left the boutique for the final time, the staff watched him go, their expressions a mix of admiration and relief. He had stood his ground, refusing to let arrogance and prejudice go unchecked. And in doing so, he had changed the rules, ensuring that the boutique would never be the same again. As the boutique returned to its usual rhythm in the weeks following Victor's dismissal, the atmosphere within the store transformed. Gone was the oppressive air of judgment and superiority that had lingered during Victor's tenure. The staff moved with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to prove that the boutique could be a place of elegance and inclusivity. Customers who had once felt alienated by Victor's behavior began to return, their trust gradually restored. Mia, now a lead associate thanks to her exemplary performance during the ordeal, took it upon herself to ensure the new values were upheld. She implemented a series of workshops for the staff, focusing on customer service, empathy, and diversity training. The workshops were not just a response to the incident with Victor, they were part of a broader initiative spearheaded by none other than Baron Trump. Baron's quiet but impactful influence extended beyond the boutique. In collaboration with his family's organization, he launched a campaign to promote fairness and inclusivity in retail spaces across the city. The initiative, dubbed Shop with Dignity, aimed to provide funding, resources, and training to businesses that pledge to create welcoming environments for all customers, regardless of appearance, background, or socioeconomic status. Meanwhile, Victor's life had taken a stark turn. Stripped of his position and reputation, he struggled to find new employment. Word of his dismissal had spread through the industry, and his name became synonymous with the very behaviors high-end boutiques sought to avoid. Desperate to regain his footing, Victor reached out to former colleagues and connections, hoping for a lifeline. But the responses were cold, polite refusals that left him feeling more isolated with each attempt. The arrogance that had once defined him now felt like a heavy weight, dragging him deeper into a pit of regret. Despite his bitterness, Victor couldn't escape the truth. His downfall was a result of his own actions. Baron's words echoed in his mind. "You did this to yourself." They gnawed at him, forcing him to confront the choices that had led to his downfall. For the first time in years, Victor was forced to reflect on the person he had become. But reflection didn't come easily to him. Instead of taking responsibility, Victor spent his days fixated on blaming others. Baron, the boutique owner, even his co-workers. All of them, in his mind, had conspired against him. Yet no matter how much he tried to convince himself, the truth remained. He had been the architect of his own misfortune. One evening, Victor found himself sitting alone in a small coffee shop, scrolling through his phone. His social media feeds were filled with news about Baron's Shop with Dignity campaign. Photos of smiling store employees and testimonials from customers who had once felt unwelcome now dominated his timeline. The campaign was gaining traction, and Baron's name was at the center of it all. Victor's chest tightened as he read the comments. People were praising Baron for his maturity, his leadership, and his ability to turn a personal incident into a force for good. Even industry insiders were weighing in, calling Baron a game-changer and a visionary. The more Victor read, the more his frustration grew. How could someone so young, so seemingly unassuming, wield such influence? But as Victor stared at his screen, a small voice in the back of his mind began to question his narrative. What if Baron wasn't the enemy? What if, instead of trying to tear him down, Baron had simply been standing up for what was right? The thought was uncomfortable, but it refused to go away. At the boutique, the changes sparked by Baron's intervention continued to ripple outward. Richard, the owner, worked closely with Baron to implement new policies and procedures that prioritized inclusivity. The store became a model for other boutiques, drawing praise from both customers and industry leaders. One day, as Baron visited the boutique to check on its progress, Mia approached him with a shy smile. "Thank you for everything you've done," she said. "This place feels completely different now. People are happier, and it's because of you." Baron shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just me," he said. "It's everyone here who decided to make a change. That's what matters." Mia nodded, her respect for Baron deepening. "Still, I think it's incredible that you took something so negative and turned it into something positive. Not many people could do that." Baron smiled, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I've learned that change doesn't happen by walking away. You have to stand your ground. Even when it's uncomfortable." The transformation at the boutique became a story that reached far beyond its walls. Under Baron Trump's guidance, the store blossomed into a symbol of change and integrity, a place where people of all backgrounds felt welcomed and valued. The Shop with Dignity campaign expanded rapidly, with dozens of boutiques and retail chains adopting its principles. The movement inspired a ripple effect, reshaping the culture of high-end retail and earning praise from industry leaders and the public alike. Mia thrived in her new role as a lead associate. She became a mentor to the staff, helping them embrace the new standards of service and respect. Her quiet strength and unwavering kindness were celebrated, and customers often sought her out for her genuine approach to helping them find what they needed. Baron, meanwhile, continued to make an impact in his understated way. Though he avoided the limelight, his work spoke for itself. He focused on expanding the Shop with Dignity campaign, attending meetings, organizing training programs, and ensuring that every initiative was grounded in empathy and fairness. His calm demeanor and thoughtful leadership set him apart, earning him respect even from those who had initially underestimated him. Victor, however, struggled to rebuild his life. His name had become synonymous with arrogance and poor judgment, making it nearly impossible for him to find a job in the retail world. As weeks turned into months, he was forced to take a hard look at himself. Though his pride still held him back, the isolation and rejection began to chip away at his defenses. Whether he would ever change remained uncertain, but the world around him had moved on. As for Baron, he remained unshaken by Victor's attempts to belittle him. He had proven that strength came not from loud words or showy actions, but from the quiet resolve to stand for what was right. His story became a source of inspiration for those who had faced discrimination or judgment, a reminder that dignity and determination could create lasting change. Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. Today's story is one that shows us the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of arrogance and adversity. It's about Baron Trump, a young man who didn't back down when faced with unfair treatment, and how his actions sparked a ripple effect that changed an entire industry. Let's be honest, we've all been there. Maybe it was a dismissive glance, a rude remark, or someone treating you as though you didn't belong. Stings, doesn't it? In those moments, it's easy to shrink back, to let the hurt and frustration consume you. But Baron's story shows us another path, a way to turn those moments into opportunities for change. Imagine walking into a high-end store, excited to shop, only to be met with sneers and judgment. That's exactly what Baron experienced. But instead of walking away, instead of letting that negativity define him, he stood his ground. And what did he do next? He didn't fight fire with fire. He used integrity and action to dismantle the very system that tried to belittle him. Think about that for a moment. How many of us would have had the courage to face someone like Victor, the antagonist in this story? Victor's arrogance was more than just an attitude. It was a way of life. He thrived on making others feel small. But when faced with Baron's quiet strength, he began to unravel. Now, here's the part that really hits home. Baron didn't stop at proving Victor wrong. He didn't settle for a personal victory. Instead, he turned his experience into something bigger, a campaign that transformed how businesses treat their customers. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about standing up for yourself. It's about creating a world where no one else has to face what you did. Ask yourself this: how would you have handled this situation? Would you have walked away? Would you have let anger take over? Or would you have done what Barron did? Stand firm, stay composed, and use your voice to make a difference? And what about Victor? Do you think he deserved what happened to him? Or do you believe people like him can change? It's a question we should all reflect on because, let's face it, we've all encountered a Victor at some point in our lives. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to learn from Barron's story. Here's the takeaway. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting the loudest or fighting back with anger. Sometimes it means staying calm, staying true to your values, and letting your actions speak louder than words. So, the next time someone tries to put you down, remember this story. Remember Barron's resolve. And remember that change is possible, but it starts with someone willing to take a stand. If you've ever experienced something similar, or if you've been inspired by this story, let us know in the comments. Your experiences matter, and they could inspire someone else to find their own strength. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Together, we can create a community that uplifts and inspires. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember, you have the power to make a difference.